Hello and welcome to Newsmakers for this Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Louis Butko, and on today's show, we're going to be talking a little Canadian history. And to do that, I'm very pleased to be joined by the host of the Canadian History X and their respective social media accounts, sporting more than 93,000 followers on Facebook and almost 55,000 followers on Twitter. Please welcome Craig Baird to the show. Craig, thank you so much for doing this. It is safe to say that you have a passion for Canadian history, no?
I would say that's probably an understatement for sure. I definitely, I am very interested in Canadian history.
When did this love affair of the history of our great nation begin?
Well, I've always been interested in history, even as a kid, but I would say that the love affair with Canadian history began when first I saw the Heritage Minutes and I saw Canadian history being presented in a very interesting way. Then I started reading the books of Baird and then watching things like Canada People's History, and it really showed me that what I was told about Canadian history being boring was wrong. It was a matter of how it was presented wasn't always as interesting, and that's what I found with my social media and my podcast is that people do love Canadian history. It's just how you're presenting it to them.
Yeah, we'll showcase some of the examples in just a little bit here, but I do want to just get back to you and when you were able to make this a full-time job. This is something that of course is a passion that you've turned into a job for you. How has this developed for you? Was it, how did you make that jump, I guess?
It was a lot of grinding and really, trying to just build it as much as I can. The podcast itself started in about May of 2019, and it started very small. It was like, 10 downloads a month, and it was just constantly, making episodes, making things interesting, and slowly building it. And then eventually I get picked up on a network, which really helped to kind of bring in ad revenue and things like that, and really expanded the show to the point now where it's about 100,000 downloads a month. And then on the social media side of things really kind of exploded in March 2023, and then I've been able to kind of create that revenue stream as well by sharing Canadian history, and then people donate and things like that to support my work, which definitely helps a lot and allows me to do this for a living now.
Well, I didn't realize, that 10 downloads a month wasn't good, or that 100,000 a month download is an actual attainable goal here. You're throwing me off. You're throwing me for a loop here, Craig. Let's talk about some of the research that goes into it. And I mean, every day you have multiple posts talking about on this day. So what does that look like? What does your notebook look like? A calendar, because you have multiple posts per day. You have to know the history of the day. What sort of research goes into each post?
Quite a bit. So I usually plan out the months ahead of time, especially with the on this day. And I have those scheduled, weeks ahead of time, just because then I don't have to worry about them. Often with the longer threads that I'll do, I will write those the day of, but I've usually done the research ahead of time. And I already know what I'm going to talk about each day going into it, whether I'm talking about somebody who was born that day or an album that was released or a major event that happened. Or in the case of October, I'm talking a lot about women's history because it's Women's History Month, as well as Canadian mysteries and things like that because it's also Halloween. So I'm really always planning ahead and doing the research ahead of time, but it definitely does take quite a while to know what to talk about. And, I got to make it interesting, so I'm getting engagement off of the social media posts, while also at the same time writing my podcast and making sure that I'm still putting out content on that side of things.
Yeah. Clearly a lot of research. You're clearly well read. What does the typical kind of research of a thread look like then? So double checking, triple checking your sources, those sorts of things. Obviously a lot of this is in your head, but the process of researching kind of one thread, and I think we have one of the Sam Recordmans we're going to throw up here as we talk about, but what's that process like?
Well, that process usually begins with, first I have the idea of what I'm going to talk about. And again, sometimes it's related to something that happened on that day. I think in the case of Sam the Record Man, it was just I wanted to talk about it. I'll usually be like sitting around, maybe watching TV, and I'll be like, oh, you know what? This is something that I would like to talk about. And then I'll put it down in my book as something to talk about on a specific day. And then the process begins of doing the research, usually have a bunch of tabs open because I don't want to just use one source. Like you said, I'm using multiple sources, trying to find as much information. I don't want to just like copy paste Wikipedia. I want to find, unique information that gets people interested in it and, gets the shares and gets people interested interested in Canadian history. So it definitely is a process of, going through different things. I've got a lot of books that I use and things like that I'll use for the research. So it definitely is a long process in order to make 12 tweets in one thread that people could read in a few minutes.
And I know you've pushed for that editing button when it comes to threads. I know that's sometimes the bane of your existence when little typos can really add up. But to the point of you doing this, and now it's a job. You're doing it just for sort of the pleasure of it for a bit there. But what's the most rewarding part for you? What's been a moment where you've triggered a conversation or anything like that really makes this that you're doing the right thing?
When people just say that they've learned something, I think one person called me the Mr. Dress-Up of Canadian history, which I really liked because that was a huge compliment. But I think it's when people say they've learned something from history, or when they find out that somebody was Canadian that they didn't know was Canadian. Frances Bay is a very good example. She was Happy Gilmore's mom. She was the woman that Seinfeld stole the rye from. And she was born in Manville, Alberta, and a lot of people had no idea about that. And so when people learn something new, or I help ignite memories for people, yesterday I had a thread up about the Love You Forever was published in 1986, I believe, on October 1st. And, a lot of people had a lot of fond memories with that, and it brought up a lot of memories for people. So when I can engage people like that and, help improve their day and make things like Twitter or other social media just a little less toxic, you can just enjoy the history, enjoy what I'm talking about, I definitely get rewarded from that.
I think Robert Munch was trending because of you yesterday, because of that thread. Yeah,
freaked a few people out with that.
Yeah, which again, you can sometimes kind of scare people, right? When you get something trending, or even there'll be days where I'll see maybe the third or fourth tweets of your thread or something like that, and get a little worried and realize, oh, why is he tweeting about this today? Why is he tweeting about this today? You've also, like you said, there's a certain nostalgic trip that you've been able to bring out of people. We did a story on your own Twitter a few weeks ago, talking about the best TV show in Canada. These obviously trigger a lot of discussions, a lot of upsets sometimes. But where did that idea come from to really even branch out a little bit more to these sort of engaging things on Twitter, but also little fact-finding missions too?
Well, I found that the polls are a really interesting and fun way to get people engaged in the history, like you said, because I can only put, one paragraph about something that we're voting on that particular day. But the polls themselves, actually, I've been doing for a few years now, but early on it was like 50 votes, and, they weren't huge polls, and now they're much larger. They get thousands of votes each day. Where it really took off was with Canada's Greatest Song, and there was a ton of dialogue about that, and it was a long process, but it was really enjoyable. And so I decided to do the Canada's Favorite TV Show, just to get people interested in Canadian pop culture and various shows that they might not have realized were Canadian. And then now we're doing Canada's Greatest Invention, and again, it's helping to teach people Canadian history without really even making it seem like you're teaching them. You're kind of giving them something to vote on. They're reading a quick little thing, and whether they know it or not, they've learned something about Canada and the many things that we've invented over the years.
To that point, you are an educator on social media and through your podcast. Has our schools done a good enough job of teaching Canadians their own history? And to that point, I know you talk about the good and the things we get to celebrate, but also the things we need to learn from and the things we need to be better from. How important is that role, and do you take that role, even on social media, that you are an educator for a lot of people?
Absolutely, and it's something that I do take very seriously, and I've had a lot of teachers reach out to me, especially with the polls, where they'll have their students vote on the polls, and then the teacher will vote in the poll based on what the students choose to vote for. So I'm getting a lot of engagement from teachers and things like that. They're using my podcast to teach, and that's really rewarding for me because I didn't have anything like that, in school when I was growing up. In terms of whether Canada's teaching its history in schools enough or properly, I think we're getting better with it. I know that it's very segmented. I grew up in Alberta, so it was very Western oriented in the terms of what we were learning. I wasn't learning very much about Eastern Canada beyond Confederation and a few other things. So I think, there could be more going across the country, more of a cohesive teaching of Canadian history, but also not just focus on, Sir John A. Macdonald and Confederation. Make Canadian history interesting. There's so many interesting stories from our history, and they often get lost in the shuffle when we're talking about bigger things like the CPR and Confederation and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is the most interesting thing that you have learned putting these together? Is there something that, even for you, a notable history lover, to come across something and just stop you in your tracks?
I don't know if I can pick one thing, because it'll happen sometimes every single day, where I'll be like, oh, I had no idea about this, and then I'm learning more about it, especially when I'm writing these threads and things like that. And, for example, yesterday, I knew that Robert Munch was Canadian, but a lot of people had no idea he was Canadian. So I have that quite a bit when I'm first writing these things up. But there's definitely moments, when I'm putting these things together where I'm like, I really had no idea about this. And sometimes I'll take that and then I'll expand that into a podcast episode, because I become so interested in it and I want to talk about it more than I can in just a quick little thread on social media.
Yeah. Again, I go back to the ideas that are just kind of roaming in your head all the time. Do you have like a book or something? Like, how do you keep track of all these things? Like, what's your tips for organization? Because, even someone who's listening to this who might be interested in Canadian history, I feel like they got a lot they can learn from you, Craig. You seem like a very organized guy. What's your process that way?
Well, I have this book right here that when I'm reading books and things like that, I'll be like, oh, that's something interesting, and I'll put it down as a thread to do in the future. And then I have my larger book that I'm always putting much more detail in what I'm going to talk about, things like that. So I'm always adding things in. I've got a spreadsheet where I'm keeping track of threads and all of that. So I'm just trying to get as much as possible, because I'm trying to put up, 3, sometimes 4 of these longer threads per day. And that can be a lot of work, because I can't just put anything up. I got to make it interesting, sometimes relevant to that day. So I'm always trying to keep track of this stuff and just, make sure that I'm doing well with putting this stuff out there, because again, it is my living. And if I slack on it, then, I might not be able to do this for a living anymore. So it's just always trying to keep going with it, and also constantly growing it as well.
Now, it's so great to see a person behind a social media account instead of an AI or something like that, especially on X. And I bring this up because, somebody who uses the platform to earn money, that's you. I'm curious as to how recent changes to the platform, or how people view platforms, like how do you react to that? Like when Elon Musk says something stupid, I mean, it's like, and I'm not trying to get you in trouble here or anything like that, but again, you're somebody who uses social media for work. You can see how it can be used for good, but at the end of the day, people are still using it for bad. And I guess how do you balance those?
Well, what I decided a while back with social media, but especially with something like Twitter, where every post you put up can be divisive one way or the other, I decided that I wasn't going to take any kind of political stance. I mean, we all have our politics and everything, but I decided I'd be completely neutral. I wouldn't get engaged with politics or anything like that other than talking about political history. I would just create a space where people could come and learn history and learn about Canada. And that would be like a safe space within Twitter or whatever social media I'm posting on, where people know that when they see my posts, it's just going to be an interesting thread. There's going to be nothing else to it. And, just make it a little bright spot in the toxicity that can be social media often and every day.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, I know that there are engagement bots who are out there who are just, making money that way. The fact you're actually doing the work and doing the thorough work, really much appreciated. When it comes to your podcast, what can people expect in an episode, a series? What does it look like for you? And what have you learned about yourself when it comes to creating, editing, distributing your own podcast?
I've learned it's quite a bit of work. It's a bit easier now because I have a network, so I have an editor and I have a audio producer who takes care of a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, so I can just focus on research, writing, and recording. But it's, I've learned the importance of things like consistency, of making sure that what you're putting out is of the top quality, because there are so many podcasts out there that you're competing against that if people don't like what you do, they're going to go on to something else. And especially with what I do, because if I'm doing, say, true crime or paranormal, there's so many other podcasts that do that. So you have a huge audience you can tap into. But I have to tap into an audience that A, is Canadian, and then B, is also interested in Canadian history. So it's like niche within a niche. So I always have to make sure that what I'm putting out is interesting, that's engaging people and helping teach them something in an interesting way, and isn't just me reading a script and droning on, but they're actually looking forward to it and looking forward to future episodes.
So just taking a few notes here, how to make a successful podcast. All those things, very helpful, Craig. Where can people find you? Where can people listen? How can people support you as well?
Well, you can find Canadian History X, and that's EHX, on every podcast platform. And then as for social media, I'm on pretty much every social media platform as CDN History EHX, except on Twitter, where I'm Craig Baird, so CraigBaird. I'm posting every day, always interesting Canadian history stuff. You'll definitely learn something if you follow me.
Oh, absolutely. And when I told our producer, Don, that I was having you on today, he felt bad because he had to correct you on something yesterday when it came to Superman or the Daily Planet or the Daily Star or something.
Daily Star, yeah.
Daily Star, yeah. He's probably yelling at me in the control room right now. But Craig, what you're doing is great work. Keep it up. I'm a big fan. I'm very happy you made the time to join me. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Awesome. My thanks to Craig Baird for joining me today. Check him out, honestly. It is a great, easy way to learn Canadian history. And as he mentioned there, if you follow him, you're guaranteed to learn something about Canadian history every single day. And check out his podcast as well, because he does a great job with that too. Speaking of checking out podcasts, thanks for checking this one out. And while you're here, make sure you like and subscribe to CHCH Podcast so you never miss an episode of this show or any of the other great shows we have for you, including Sportsline with Bubba O'Neill or the Trending Now podcast with yours truly. I want to thank Mike Corsten. I want to thank Laura Brody as well for helping put this show together today. And one more time, thank you for listening. Could not do the show without your support. From all of us here at CHCH, I'm Louis Butko. Have a great day.